Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. Yourself, George, joined once more by Dave and Cam for another entry in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. And this time round, we don't just reach a terminal. We're in the year 2004 as we march on into the 21st century. And we, I've just already said, we get to talk about the terminal. We get to talk about Tom Hanks again. Catherine Zeta-Jones, Steven Spielberg, John Williams, and the rest of it. So this is going to be a really interesting review. But before we get into any of that sort of stuff, how are we both doing tonight?
Doing wonderful.
Yeah, very well. Thank you very much.
Excellent. It is, for anyone curious back home, we're pre-recording this a few weeks in advance. At the time this going up, Cam will be on a lovely holiday with Scott, who both the Spy House team out together. That's going to be pretty amazing to get both of you two out in the States. And we'll be just chilling here doing nothing in England. So we do hope you get the chance to enjoy this video. And obviously we hope, Cam, for the future, having a great time away, as we expect you will be. But
fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely. Crossed. I think you'll be all right. It should be good. It should be good. Everyone follow them on social media. They'll be posts by then. But I guess what we can sort of do is ask everyone to comment their thoughts on the terminal. The reason why, we'll get into background of this film very shortly, but this was one of the most requested videos for people to be on, which, as somebody that knew nothing heading into this, I was so curious as to why. And it's not an arrogance of not knowing what it was about. I was like, why is everyone asking for the terminal? Where's E.T.? Where's Saving Private Ryan? Why the terminal? And that was kind of my vibe heading into the film, which made it actually really exciting to get to. And I've got a boring statistic to bring up shortly. And aside from that, as I said, please do comment your thoughts. Again, if you're a fan of this, if you really enjoy this one, if you hate this film, be curious about all of that. And do follow us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And we've got a link to Redbubble in that description below. But what I want to do, I want to put you both on the spot. I love putting people on the spot when we do these series. Dave, you had Leonardo DiCaprio last week. We'll do Dave, then Cam. Favorite Tom Hanks film? Go.
Castaway.
Saving Private Ryan for me.
Excellent. I'm with you, Cam. That's a lovely little way to get people on board. As I said, maybe comment your favorite Tom Hanks film, because this is his third collaboration with Spielberg at this point out of five so far. I'm just trying to think out loud. Obviously, we've got The Post and Bridge of Spies. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. Just in case anyone is at home thinking, we'll get to those. We've got a few more weeks before all of that sort of stuff, and I'm dawdling again. So what we're going to do, we're going to, as we always do with this series, we're going to look at the IMDb plot synopsis. Why? I don't know why. But if you don't know anything about the terminal, if you haven't seen it, but you're still on this review, I wouldn't say click away. I'd say you might have a really interesting conversation about to get on. So the plot synopsis is: an Eastern European tourist unexpectedly finds himself stranded in JFK Airport and must take up temporary residence there. Nice and easy, straight to the point. It says everything you need to know about the film. And where I kind of want to go with that is asking you both, what is your history of this film? Like, do you remember seeing it for the first time, or your thoughts on it? Because, as I said, I knew nothing. So I've been really excited to see other people's sort of thoughts and their history with it.
It wasn't a cinema watch for me. I didn't go and see it when it came out. It was one of those that was just on a channel, and I happened to catch it starting. I was like, oh, okay, I'll see what this is like, and was then engrossed for the next couple of hours with a movie that was a gentle ride. It made me smile. It was feels sometimes very un-Spielberg, but sometimes really Spielberg at the same time. It's it was just a random catch on TV for me, but I've seen it many times now.
Yeah, for me, I didn't see this one in theaters. It was sort of that era. Like, for me, around 2008 was where I started just seeing everything in theaters. But this was still the era where I only saw 50 movies in theaters in a year or something like that. And still a lot, but for some reason this one passed me by, and it wasn't until home video that I raced out to watch it.
Interesting. It is one of them that I think this isn't just the term. It's so many Spielberg films. I feel everybody has a different story with almost every entry, which has kind of made this aspect really fun compared to other series where we've done this. And I guess, as I said with mine, I hadn't seen this film. I knew nothing of it. I knew of the poster when I did the Photoshops at the start of the year. But aside from that, I didn't know the cast. I didn't know Diego Luna was in it, and I'm going to keep bringing that because I've already told you both. Sorry, I'm going to have to hear it again. When I was scheduling this a few weeks ago, I realized that, hold on. When I found out, Diego Luna is in this film, I can't remember who told me. And I kind of had this buzz. I was like, wait, our episode of The Term was going to go up one day before the Cassian series premieres on the 31st of August. But it's now been delayed to the 21st of September. So our Diego Luna double bill has been stolen from us. And I've just got to say, like, it's nice. I mean, again, I've not seen that much of his work, but it's always Spielberg never really gets it wrong, does he, with some of his supporting cast members? Like, you look at so many of his, Cam will bring up always probably a fair amount across the series, but even like some of those films, like you have supporting characters, maybe not always. I just got to mix with Empire of the Sun. That's a terrible mistake I just made. Even like the Empire of the Sun, like supporting characters, you know, you get people like Ben Stiller when they're young. It's really interesting seeing like who crops up. Why have I said always? We're going to talk about always later, as I said. But aside from that, as I said, the term, it's going to be a really interesting one to speak about. We've gone through our memories. I want to talk about some behind the scenes. So this completely blew my mind today. So DreamWorks originally paid for the rights for this story, $250,000, to a man called Mehran Karami Nassiri. I probably pronounced that horrifically, so apologies. And he was an Iranian refugee that spent 18 years in a terminal in France. And he wrote a book in that terminal, more productive than I would be, if I'm being honest, across 18 years. And they paid $250,000 for it, but they didn't use his story. They almost had their own story in a similar environment and setting, I guess we can say. I don't even know, would you call it inspired by true events? I don't really know what the term is for that. He's not got a credit. There's nothing dedicated. And the most insane thing I found out was that this film came out 2 years before he was out of the terminal. So I'm very curious. Like, did he get the chance to watch it in the terminal? Like,
I don't know.
There's no cinemas, but you know, you get like DVD shops back in the day. Like, would the terminal have been released whilst he was there on DVD for him to watch? Like,
Wouldn't that be awful? He gets released after 18 years, gets on a plane, and that's the movie that's playing. Like, what?
Yeah. It's weird because like Andrew Niccol has a story credit on this movie, and he wrote Gattaca and directed Gattaca as well, but also wrote The Truman Show. And the fact that he doesn't have a screenplay credit on this makes me wonder if they use that as a jumping off point to something maybe a little darker than what wound up in the script, because again, it's kind of odd to have a writer of his stature just with a story credit.
I'm quite confused because I can imagine now this horrific film where they've like intentionally locked someone in a terminal for as long as possible. And you mentioned Truman Show, and that's kind of I haven't actually seen the Truman Show, but I know enough about it, and I know it's on the Jim Carrey. So I've still got a lot of great Jim Carrey films to see. But it's there. Like, I can see that as a horrific dark comedy now, can't you? Just this poor bloke, European citizen as well, just getting the most horrific luck at an airport for seeing how this. It's kind of like something I expect to see a YouTuber do, wouldn't it? Like those, you know, these like modern day pranks that just get too far. I could picture like, let's redo the terminal. I'm gonna, you know, you can picture awful yellow text thumbnail now. I survived 9 months at a terminal in America.
Is this the Cinema Savvy spin-off show that you've been shopping around?
We're gonna be like remaking like incredible films with like our awful versions, and it'll go terribly. We'll get like 3 subscribers. It's fine, and 1 will be in my other channel. But no, I am. Oh god, that would be such. Has anyone done that? I mean, I know that, not to get into YouTube, I know that Mr. Beast just did a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory video, which is actually pretty great for anyone that likes the original Charlie Chocolate Factory film. And he's done Squid Game. I've still not seen Squid Game, but someone comment, any YouTubers that have done like real life, what would you call it, rebuilding like film sets, or
there was like recreating. There was those like the people that did the Raiders of the Lost Ark remake, the shot for shot version.
The kids one, yeah.
Yeah, and you got the Toy Story when they did it with the Toy Story toys. That was pretty cool. And Disney let them keep it up for copyright, which I think is actually really nice of Disney for a change. But yeah, people comment. If there's anything like that, comment something fun. We'll have a look at them. Again, it's just it's a really random observation, but it's just such an incredible. I really want to I don't want to read the book per se. That sounds really rude. I've just got a lot of books I need to read, including a 750-page book about Oppenheimer for next July. So I'm a bit bogged down for whenever I want to start reading about nuclear bombs. but I'm just trying to concept, like, I'm 26, and this is where, like, as I've got a bit older, I've not struggled with the concept of like time and prison, but you hear stories of people in prison for like 30 years by mistake. And I'm sort of sat there like, I haven't even existed for some of these like sentences and stuff. And for a man to spend 18 years in a terminal, and it's real, and the backstory for anyone curious about it. I believe that the Iranian government, I don't know the full story, but I believe that he had to leave as a refugee, and his papers were reportedly stolen whilst he was en route to the UK. And when he got intercepted, he was sent by the UK back to France. And because he didn't exist as an individual from a nation, he had to stay in a terminal. I just can't wrap my head around it. Can someone jump in? Like, how is it possible? Like, just to do that for 18 years? I'm just traumatized.
Well, it makes me wonder if, like, perhaps originally this was going to be like a darker look at bureaucracy and how it can like dehumanize an individual. That's not the movie at all we're going to talk about today, but that's why when I see that Andrew Niccol credit, it really does jump out to me. Is like something happened along the development road here.
It is it's so underplayed with this as well. Like, yeah, he hasn't got a country anymore, and that's kind of what they really the only mention of. Like, you've got no country. It's never about him so much, but yeah, it is much lighter than what I think it definitely started out something. To not give a credit to that story, it's obviously based loosely upon real events, but yeah, it's a much brighter film that Spielberg actually gave us eventually.
And even to go so far as to have it be a fictional country he comes from. I know that there was talk of it being, I think Belarus or Hungary. And at the time, one of them had just been let into the EU. And they said, we don't want any bad press that could come from a film about, a coup in our country that's fictional. And as you've both kind of hinted there, like there's definitely like a darker story to be told in regards to that. And as you kind of said, Cam, like the film isn't that, it's not dark. And it does make me think that, did Spielberg come on board for something horrific and depressing, and him probably be like, you know what? I want to kind of do something a bit more uplifting. Because where I kind of coming in with this, Dave, we spoke before, obviously you joined me in the Catch Me If You Can review. This is almost like a perfect Spielberg double bill of a film it's inherently a drama, but there are those lighter comedic touches. And I feel like from everything I've seen up to this point, I won't look at the ones I've seen since then, they kind of stand on their own as these more, I wouldn't even call them family dramas. They're sort of like, there are certain, not types of people, that sounds really rude, and I don't want to compare it to Netflix films. They're the kind of films that I think would probably have a cult following by a certain demographic. I maybe want to say early to mid 30s upon release. I hope that doesn't sound insulting, but they don't feel like a typical Spielberg. Here's the adventure, here's the kids, here's this horrific real life story we're going to turn into a film. This in Catch Me If You Can are these really interesting, fun, and I sort of said like chilled out films that I don't think he's got two films like this up until 2004. Dave, what do you think? Like, does that make sense?
Definitely. It's I say we did Catch Me If You Can, and it was one of those that you just sit back and you can watch and have a really good time with. And this is, you don't want to say it's too light, but it is one of those I could put on and just sit for a couple of hours and just kill some time with it and not have to pay it a load of attention. The story is pretty simple and straightforward. It's got some really nice moments, like the love story that's in there and the unrequited love that's in that. And it's just it's a really, I really do adore the film, and it's one I can put on any time, but it is one I can even put on just on the background. And when you put films on just to ignore sometimes, but they're just on because you enjoy the ambience from it, it's one of those for me.
Yeah, like Spielberg has always been very much inspired by classic Hollywood filmmaking, but it feels like here he's kind of edging more towards something a little more playful than he'd been doing for a while. We saw him doing, George, you and I talked about Always. That was a remake of like a 1940s sort of romantic drama, but it feels like he's kind of edging into sort of this, like playful comedic kind of tone of filmmaking that I think like it really grabbed people with Catch Me If You Can. I think people really got on board with that one. The Terminal is kind of an odder beast in that it's like kind of doing sort of this, evoking a lot of kind of classic Hollywood sort of, comedy drama kind of tropes, but at the same time, it's also very grounded in its time period where there's a lot of 9/11 sort of imagery, or not imagery, but like, allusions to like a post 9/11 New York and the appreciation of that city. And it feels very much grounded within that specific time it was being made, maybe more so than some of his other stuff, say like Always, which is very much just evoking the past.
No, that's really what I said. Actually, you mentioned 9/11. Let's bring it up because, again, these were put up by the time, but when we did a review of Minority Report, which is going the day after this episode comes out, sorry, so no one's going to have the chance to see it yet. That was very much a post 9/11 film, and what we spoke about in depth is that film was shot before 9/11. That there's being ahead of its time, and there's a world-changing event several months after it's been filmed. I don't know why next door neighbor's dog's barking. They're definitely not eavesdropping to this podcast. But it's one of them where jumping to the terminal, and obviously next up's War of the Worlds. Okay, we've got Catch Me If You Can. It's almost like a post 9. I know that post 9/11 is almost a genre now, or like I don't want to say an era of filmmaking, but there was this. Nolan's Batman is one of the standouts. Daniel Craig James Bond, which we know was inspired off Nolan's Batman, and the filmmaking post 9/11 changed. And
the Bourne movies are big, big entries there.
Bourne ones, even Die Another Day. They put something in there. The world's changed in the 40 which have been away, and it's really interesting for me to see this film because I did sit back and think, this is a film set in a town after 9/11, and obviously fictionally, while it's set in New York, obviously, but it never once references 9/11, which I think is very important. But to me, that image was spinning in the back of my mind, and it's the little moments of them, all the security watching the CCTV, the opening scene. What are you doing in America? Because when I went there in 2019 for Chicago celebration, I'd never been to the States, and I got a bit not scared, but I'm just a nerd in Star Wars clothes with all the Star Wars fans in the queue. And they're like, what's the purpose of your visit? And I was like, what? Like, what's the purpose of your visit? I was like, to go to Star Wars celebration. Like, are you here for business or pleasure? I was like, pleasure? Like, let me go. Like, and it's the opening.
You will let me through.
Yeah, I wish. Funny story. Ian McDermott was on our flight, and there was delays at the airport, and everyone was in the queue together, and he looked so uncomfortable because there were hundreds of Star Wars fans around him. And it was about an hour or two to get through, and you could just see him like absolutely bricking. So no one asked him for a photo in the end, but it was fun to watch. But how do you feel with the openings? The opening's almost a montage, and what's sort of fascinating is, we'll bring up the airport itself. Obviously, they couldn't get permission to film this at any airport, which is completely understandable. Also, probably post 11, you're not gonna have a filmmaking crew come in. I think it's filmed at the start of 2004 or end of 2003. Sorry, that would have been off limits, and they built a set for it. And I just want to give them credit for that. They built an entire airport set, and it's actual genius because obviously the whole film set there. They only had, in theory, one primary big set to build, and I think the opening scene, it's not just a monologue of people going through. You're setting the scene for the film. We're with our location before we meet the protagonist, but it's giving character to the air and the environment when you've got the tourists who were trying to get in with the Disneyland stuff getting chased out. And I love that idea that, since when did tourists not have photography? That's quite probably racist, isn't it? It's what they say that like the Chinese tourists not have cameras. But I would imagine, certainly there's a lot of prejudice in American airports. That's a very real thing. Even today, it's very, very prejudiced, and you can understand the mindset in 2004 of that approach to we can't have anything dodgy happening. How do you feel about all of that? I know I've just sort of gone on a complete tangent there, but
well, there was one element that really, for me, was like the one thing that they kind of got wrong was like there's the point where like Tom Hanks's character is like pulling out like the like the multi-purpose tool out of his pocket. I'm like, there is no way that is getting through customs at that point. I remember being in Australia, and my friend, just from backpacking, he had like a butter knife that we would use to like put peanut butter on bread while we were on hikes and stuff. And he accidentally took that onto an airport, and that was like a big no-no in Australia. So that tool would not have made it through security.
There's absolutely no way it is. He just pulls it out. He's, oh yeah, I've just got me knife. Don't worry about that. But yeah, I think it's it's such like that post 9/11 period where films were different, the way they set this up, and you had to kind of, I think it has to be addressed early on that the airport itself is like a character in this, and that beginning look at sort of, it's almost an opening look at Stanley Tucci's character as well. So like how he interprets everybody who's coming to the airport, how you can tell he's been doing it for such a long time and what he's looking out for to keep that airport safe. So it's a really, really nice opening to just give us a really nice set scene for that airport that Tom Hanks is then going to be stuck in.
It really captures like the energy. Like there's so much energy to Spielberg's filmmaking off the top and creating that environment. You know, like we'll talk about like the overall qualities of the movie going forward, but like in terms of like setting you within a specific place, this is why Spielberg's one of the masters.
Yeah, and I don't want to make a modern comparison, but Bullet Train's now out for anyone that's had the unpleasant fortune of viewing it. And yeah,
it's okay. It's okay.
It's when you get these films. I love films that are set in one location. I think it's a very rare thing for production companies to do. I think it's an even harder thing for someone to direct them. But again, like on paper, a film set in a terminal should be rubbish, right? And that's genuinely how I feel. Why would you have a film set in a terminal? Obviously, we know why, because we get this film. And it's never been done since because you don't need to, because we've got this film. But as you said, you've got the energy of introducing this and with the characters. I mean, we'll get into them in a bit later, but Stanley Tucci in this, I thought like, oh, he's going to be like the Stanley Tucci we know. He's going to be great. He's gonna maybe save the day for once, not Tom Hanks. And his descent, where it begins with how we meet him, you think he'd be the one looking out for him. And I love his character arc in this, but it's just, yeah, there's so much energy. And for a Spielberg film, I think the word we've used across the series is like, does it feel like a Spielberg film? And this does. And again, how can he make a film set in a terminal feel like his own? And he just can. It's through performances, it's through the story, it's how he directs these films. It's the little moments of comedy. It's the heart-wrenching moments. It's when he wants to put the drama in there with the character development. He just knows where to do it, when to do it, and when he gets it right, it's just fascinating to speak about. And I kind of want to jump to you first, Cam. I don't want to go too much into the Always comparisons, but when we did the Always review, we said we'll come back, we'll talk about the tone. I know we mentioned the romance that we've not spoke about in this yet, but on paper, a film like Always could have a tone like this in theory.
Mm-hmm.
And do we think a film like Always, made in 2004, would have been superior with his, I guess we could say, like, probably him hitting his peak or his, I don't want to say maturity level because that's really like disrespectful to his early films, but do you think a film like Always would have been better made from him in the noughties after a Catch Me If You Can or a Terminal?
I don't know, because like Spielberg goes through this shift after doing Schindler's List, where there's like kind of like these darker shades that start to work their way into his work, even in something like The Lost World, which is a total escapist summer movie, has a much darker tone than Jurassic Park does. And Catch Me If You Can even has like serious elements. I don't know, like I feel like Always was one that had sort of more of a need of like the sweeping romantic spirit. And I don't know that that's the Spielberg who's operating at this point. Even this movie, which could have been, had it been made in the 40s, been like this kind of playful movie, there's still a lot of darker elements in this film. So I don't know. Like, I just wonder if Always was always kind of a doomed project in some ways.
And Dave, have you seen Always? I'm not going to ask you to give a thought.
No, I've not seen Always. No,
don't worry, you're not missing anything. Don't worry. That's but you know what? Surprisingly, I don't ever talk about view numbers. Always has been one of the more randomly popular videos, which can be the way. We're probably, Cam, did we check this before? Will we like the third ever review of Always on YouTube? I don't.
Probably.
There's probably like another film called Always with another word before or after that everybody was trying to find and stumbled on it. But yeah, that and Sugarland Express has really surprised us.
All the fans of I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer were very disappointed.
It's just, yeah, it's one of them. And I'm trying. I don't know actually how we follow talking about Always. Let's talk about the romance. I was going to say let's talk about 9/11. That sounds horrible. We've already spoken about that, but that's probably going to pop up throughout the video today. Do we view this as a romantic film? Because I thought heading into it could be. I know that some of the posters have Tom Hanks, of course, with Catherine Zeta-Jones. how do we feel about the relationship Spielberg's trying to maybe conjure between the two of them, or the fact that we have this sort of the ideal that Tom Hanks is this ideal of being a romantic whilst at terminal for the foreseeable future. Chris, maybe it's a question more to their chemistry, or how does that feel like to you watching this? I hinted at this film being of a certain demographic. I'm just going to say it. This is like the sorry if anyone really enjoys it, like the Bridget Jones type crowd I'm expecting to be watching films at the terminal. The Mamma Mia group. I won't watch my James Bond sing and dance. I'm sorry. No matter how much I like ABBA, I'm not seeing Pierce Brosnan do that.
It's a really strange one because the romance side is certainly there. Obviously, more from Tom Hanks's character is in this romantic headspace with this woman he met in this airport, with the stewardess. And yet Catherine Zeta-Jones has that unrequited love with the man who's having an affair from his wife, who's never going to leave his wife, but she'll keep going back to. And while she falls for that into that role of where she says, I can't believe I asked you out, I'm so sorry. And she does it a couple of times where she asks him out almost by accident because the way she has almost found herself behaving because of the relationship that she's in. I just think it's very well played. I don't know if, there's romance littered throughout as well, because obviously we've got the Zoe Saldana character as well. So we've got that in the background. So there are romantic elements, but I don't know if I would put this down as a full romantic movie.
Yeah, like I would say there's more of a romantic sense of community. Like I think that's ultimately what the connection is between the Tom Hanks character and just the community of the airport. In terms of like, an actual like love story, oh boy, like I don't know, like the Catherine Zeta-Jones stuff. This is a study in star chemistry, people. This is what happens when you take two of the greatest stars who exist at this point in time and give them a romance that really kind of doesn't work at all, and watch the two of them kind of make sense of it. Because like the Catherine Zeta-Jones character, this is very like 2004 writing, where it's like this, woman who's defined entirely by her relationships. That's all she really talks about. And it ends in a way that is pretty unsatisfying. But again, you're like watching two movie stars who, when they are isolated in a scene and you're just going with them in the moment, sitting there watching them have dinner, for example, there's like magic happening. So it's very much like just two performers at the top of their game, making a lot out of a little. Weirdly, like I think it actually makes more sense still than the Zoe Saldana romance that had me absolutely scratching my head at a certain point. I'm sure we can jump off that in a moment, but yeah.
Did he ever speak to her?
No, he never spoke to her.
Yes.
And then he proposed and she married him with no contact whatsoever. It was insane. I actually like had to pause the movie, pull up the Wikipedia and read through, because I was convinced that I had blacked out for a moment or something because there was nothing that made any sense with that. So like, this is, if you're looking at Spielberg's movies, this is not one of his best representations of female characters in his movies. And there is like a sense of old-fashioned kind of romance going on here. It's the sort of thing you could imagine happening in like a comedy drama in the 40s. But like setting it in that specific point in time makes it a little creakier.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was completely gobsmacked when the proposal happened. Because you're sort of with Diego Luna for 5-10 minutes with the back and forth, and then you just don't hear anything about it for like 30 minutes, and it's so bizarre. And I'm going to bring up Cassian and Star Trek. The fact that Zoe Saldana would go on to be in Star Trek is actually, obviously I've seen her Star Trek films. So when she was having this conversation, she's like, I go to conventions. I was like, conventions? And I was like, I know that they're popular now much more than they were back then. 2004 is not even that long ago, if we're really being honest with convention history. But I was like, to get a convention name drop in a film in the mid-noughties is quite a thing. And it's probably more accepted now than it probably was back then, if I'm being honest. But Cam, you're the Trekkie of this trio at the moment.
Yeah, I've got my Star Trek 5 poster right there.
I know we spoke about it before, but obviously she then go on to be in Star Trek. As a Star Trek fan,
Yeah.
Does that like not give this film like an up? Do you see it as a nice thing, or I know like for me it was really cool, but I'm just curious like if there's any like Star Trek community, because if it was Star Wars, you just know someone somewhere's probably excited, someone somewhere's crying and angry. I guess Simon Pegg's a great example. He did all the sketches mocking the prequels. He did a great one as him as C-3PO and Nick Frost, and then he was in the Star Wars films, which is great. How do you feel with Zoe Saldana? Again, I'm over exaggerating talking about a Star Trek thing here. It was way before, 5 years before, in fact.
Well, I mean, I thought she was really like delightful in the movie in a role that's again not written the best, but like she really jumps off the screen. You can see why she was destined to become a movie star. But no, the Star Trek stuff is really fun because I was also confused when they were talking about conventions. And at this point in time, 2004, going to Star Trek conventions was not really something you spoke of openly. It was kind of still, we're a few years away from that, Comic-Con kind of acceptance where everyone's big into those sorts of things. Couple more years, really. And so I thought that was incredibly fun to have her acknowledging she goes to, cons, doing the Vulcan salute. She also mentions her favorite episode is Doomsday Machine, which, by the way, is an awesome episode. She has great taste in Star Trek episodes. So, no, that was just fun. And honestly, like, I don't think I've ever heard a Star Trek fan reference this at all. At all. So that's kind of crazy. Not that I can think of.
I'm not going to stereotype a fan base, but is it the kind of film people would expect Star Trek fans to see? That's probably a question within itself. But
Yeah.
Even weirder one, I'm going to not put him on sort of more Spielberg stuff. Was there ever talk of him doing a Star Trek? Like we know he almost did Bond. We know he almost did Star Wars. Was there ever a conversation, a TV episode? I doubt it because it's probably too big at the time when it sort of got the relaunch. But it's interesting that and I'll say this, I'm glad that he's got a Star Trek character reference more than Star Wars, because I think with Star Wars, not that it's easy, we know it's his best friend's series.
I mean, it's interesting with Spielberg and Star Trek in that he's never really talked about Star Trek at all, to the best of my knowledge. But if you go and watch the episode Doomsday Machine, interestingly, the one she referenced here, there's a lot of similarities to Jaws. And not just like visuals, music as well. There is a lot of stuff that's very similar to the treatment of the shark in Jaws in that particular episode. So I don't know. It's funny because Tom Hanks is actually the one who's much more of a big Star Trek fan. He's very open about that. I've never really heard Spielberg reference it too much.
That's interesting. Dave, anything? I know you're more of a Wars guy like me.
Yeah, no, I actually really like it, and I think it plays really well. Like we said, like Cam just said, Saldana, for the role she's given, for the little she's given, she plays it so well. The moment when he brings over, when he actually has the visa, and she has that change in attitude to it's just the line reading of what have we got here? That change that I did no justice to. It's just that little snip where you just think, oh, she's a really good actor. She can just tell in that moment. That she's really talented. So yeah, little to do, and I say as most women have in this, everyone's kind of put on the back burner behind sort of Hanks. Really, it's his thing. It's his movie, and these other characters are going to orbit around him. But yeah, it's a really nice little moment that for her. I really like that. Just that moment when he gets the visa and her change in attitude, I think is really wonderful.
Just imagine getting married as well. You get married at your terminal. Imagine getting married at work. Well, unless you work at Pine Street, it's like why? Anyway, that's mog. I think because it's just meant to be nice, isn't it? We can laugh and we can make digs, but I think it works for the film more so than the story, because it's so you reach points of this where things get so ridiculous. It will kind of I'm like it's almost like a fantasy. This film, in a very weird way, and again, it goes back to that concept that this obviously wasn't the film. You know what? We mentioned about the real life behind the scenes stuff. Had they'd have actually put this is inspired by Meran's story, I think this would look atrocious. And I'm going to kind of backbone and say that I'm glad it doesn't reference it at all, because his 18 years is very different to Tom Hanks' 9 months. And I think they're probably consciously aware of that. And again, they did pay for the rights for the book, so they're entitled in their own mind. But I'm glad there's no inspired by, written by, story credit here. I think because the film goes so outrageously ridiculous, even the date when like I know the actor that played Gupta was apparently like, famous being on the Disney Channel. He was famous for doing plate spinning tricks. I was like, yeah,
Right.
it kind of
Look.
makes sense because this bloke's just randomly just doing plate spinning, at a terminal. Great, but again, it's that I don't want to say Spielbergian trope, but it's that like he's just trying to be a bit playful, isn't he? Like I think he's just trying to add a bit of light-hearted humor to the scene. I don't know. It's definitely not a romantic thing. If I was at me and out and someone started spinning plates, I'd honestly be like, please leave.
And there's no way he gets that mop right in front of that plane tire, and that does not crush him to death.
Yeah. To me, this is where like the movie for me like doesn't quite work. And it's because of elements like this. Like there's a reality to the world Spielberg is building, but at the same time, he's fallen into those always type of kind of cutesy quirks that like some of it is kind of fun. Like this movie's very episodic, and some of it's actually quite funny or charming. It has genuine moments, but I find too often he kind of falls into this very cloying kind of like character staring at Tom Hanks in wonder. And then these big kind of goofy moments, like as you said, the custodian out there stopping a plane with a mop. And I'm like, what world is this set in? You're asking me to buy that this is like a post 9/11 New York where I'm going to watch Tom Hanks, head out onto the street to get, like a, jazz photo signed. And it's trying to be grounded and like recognize the tragedy of this character where we're watching him like break down into tears when he's seeing the TV that his country has had a military coup. Like, again, played to the hilt by Tom Hanks in that moment. But then it has so much weird fairy tale logic stuff that I go back and forth. Like, did Spielberg know what movie he wanted to make, or did he kind of just like play it as a whim day to day? I don't know.
It's a very good question, actually. When you mentioned, I mean, the mop thing is just. I thought he was going to die. Like how like Luke Skywalker goes out to take on the First Order in Last Jedi. I was like, this is Gupta's big moment, and we're going to get like the Kylo Ren, like just the camera cuts. I was like, oh no, like he's gone, like he's dead now. And obviously he didn't. He got sent back, back home. And again, like even little things like I don't want to jump into the ending, but I like that when we haven't spoke about Stanley Tucci, but we'll get into something very shortly, properly. When you get the big merger moment, the climax, where it's hey, you want to go to New York? I'm going to get every single person here done that you care about, and I love that moment because that's to me when it clicked. I think if that scene hadn't worked for me personally, I don't think the film would work. But because I've invested time into some of the other characters. Speaking of time. Dave, you made a joke and catch me if you can that every one of his songs like 2.5 hours for about three months at this point. 2 hours 8 minutes, and it flew by. It absolutely flew by. I mean, it is covering 9 months of time, so that's understandable. But yeah, the Cup stuff was weird because I really, again, even like a young Diego Luna, you can see that chemistry in him. Like he's a very, I mean, I'm not saying Narcos. I know he's in that, and that's going to be a very different series to obviously this or Cassian probably, but when you see him in interviews in the media, he's so energetic, and I really get that from his character in this. And there's just these little moments of this. I really, really enjoyed time with the small characters, but I'm gonna just jump in and say that I didn't like the character of Amelia, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. I just never, and this is it. I don't want to bring like real life stuff into it, but at the core, I just don't like her character that, I'm in love with him, but he's cheating on his wife, and I know, and I'm fine with it, and I want him to be there, but I'm still going to sit there cheating with him. I think my new camp said earlier, you're sort of disappointed by their ending resolution. I was like, Tom Hanks' disappointment shaking head. I was like, this film didn't need this. Like, I like the logic of, she knew someone, and that person all along was the guy, but I feel like it did her character a disservice at the end, and I feel it's just because I've enjoyed so many of the characters in the film. I feel it's a bit of a wasted character arc with Amelia, if I'm being really honest.
She has no growth. She's exactly the same place when the movie ends to where it started. There is not, no matter what she had, the little bit of dating, the little bit of flirtatious romance, she is nowhere further in her life and her character when we leave her at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're trying to establish some sort of connection between the fact that like Tom Hanks's character is in the exact same place throughout the story and that she is,
Yeah.
emotionally in the same place. But I don't think the movie underlines it well enough to actually communicate that. That's more like, I think that might be what they're trying to say. But it's kind of muddy. And like, they have a moment, for example, where she's taken into Stanley Tucci's character's office. And he says, oh, you're a beautiful woman. You could get any man you wanted. What do you see in Victor? And she's like, something like, you would never understand. Someone like you would never understand. And it's like, you give her that moment, and then it cuts to her getting mad at Tom Hanks for not telling her that he lived in an airport when he did. He actually was quite upfront about this. He never lied at all. And it just is like this weird kind of like back and forth with her. He's building her fountains, these grand romantic gestures, but at the same time, she is the only one that can get him a day pass because the man she's seeing, the married man she's seeing, has the ability to do so. Like, it feels too convenient and very strangely, conceived.
Dave, anything on the
totally? It's just, yeah, like I said, it's just like she just doesn't have the growth for me as a character. Like, yes, there's some nice moments. The stuff about the Napoleon book thing that they talk about every time gets a little bit annoying to me, to be honest. Like, the same question I saw already, what did they get each of those a wedding? Don't really. No, it doesn't do that for anything for me. It's just like, wow, that's the thing you talk about when you meet up after so many weeks. But yeah, I just wish she had a bit more to do, or she didn't need to go back to him at the end. She could have got the past and still had that. Didn't have to end up with Tom Hanks. She could have just moved on with her life and started to say, yeah, I've left him and I'm now doing this, but I got you this because of him. And then she's moved somewhere. We've actually got some growth out of her, which I think's missing. And I think it's for getting Catherine Zeta-Jones to play that role after it wouldn't be this long after Chicago, after the win for Chicago. Was that 2000?
Is this just after? Was that 02?
2002.
Yeah, so she's just come off that best. She's got her Oscar, and then she gets a Spielberg movie given to her, and like, just doesn't seem to really be the role for her to take at that point.
No, and it's like, now that I'm like thinking back, it's like so much of the movie is Tom Hanks is like this oddball character because he's trapped in this airport. And so are all the other characters to a degree. And we see that, they find happiness or community within that. And she's the only one who, and Stanley Tucci as well, who don't really find anything for like, happiness or, anything. It's a very unfortunate role, I think, to give to someone who's just come off an Oscar win. Like, you want to see her really like stretch versus like this, which is a lot of this almost feels like they knew they had kind of an iffy role and they're like, she can make it work.
It's a bit like Halle Berry winning the Oscar for Monsters Ball whilst doing Die Another Day, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's
a good one,
it's the next couple of years before, but it's a really good point there because I fully agree with both of you with all of those points. And we spoke about Tom Hanks, but not really spoke too much about Victor himself. How do you feel? Because you know what? Again, I've seen this once today for the first time. This is very, very fresh in my mind. I loved this performance by Tom Hanks, and I'm going to say something maybe controversial, and it's such a terrible take, but you see it a lot. I was one of those that would joke like, haha, Tom Hanks comes in to save the day. I think I said it earlier, actually. And he very much has done that throughout his career. And it's an unfair like phrase, but it's just one that he uses a lot. But in this, again, because I knew nothing, I don't know he was playing a tourist of such. I thought it'd be like this really cheesy film. He's going to meet somebody in a terminal, and they're going to be like commuting every week and fall in love or something. I think the moment, Cam, you mentioned the scene earlier when he starts figuring out the coup. The first like 10, 15 minutes of this film, Tom Hanks, where he doesn't speak any English, he's convincing because not that he just doesn't sound like Tom Hanks, sounds like Tom Hanks with a great accent. I know that his father-in-law, I want to say, is from Bulgaria or has heritage in Eastern Europe. So he actually is quite familiar with some of the language as well, which is very cool. But for me, this is like a real underrated Tom Hanks performance, if I'm going to be honest. And I wonder, is it because it's trapped in this film that people don't speak about with Spielberg that people can be mixed on? Or is it the fact he's had such an incredible career elsewhere, people aren't going to go back to a film like this because there was a really good performance there. But then it can be jarring at times that you get the incredible moment of him finding out his country's had a coup. and then he sort of forgets about it and he's moved on the next day. That's my only weird thing, that we obviously get them celebrating and then the war is over, but I wish we could have delved a little bit deeper into some of his personal issues at home. But I can forgive that because I'm just invested in his character and his performance up to that point.
It is incredible. He does learn English very quickly for me in the movie. Like, he gets a couple of phrase books and goes through them, and suddenly his English is pretty fluent. I know he's there for 9 months, but it's fairly quick that it happens on there. But I think you're right. The performance of Victor is, this movie has to stand on that performance. If that doesn't work, the movie itself just doesn't. There are parts that don't work, but without the main Hanks performance, you're not going to get this movie even being as enjoyed as I do. It lives and dies with his performance. And you're right, it's a really, really strong performance. The coup stuff should have been more like he's a man without a country and he has his passport taken off him and all of that. And it's very much brushed over after the first 20 minutes. Like, we don't really kind of go back to it until he gets given his passport back at the end, and like, yeah, it's all over. You can go home now. But yeah, it's I love the performance of Hanks. I just think he plays it really well when he needs to, with the emotions there, but there's also the moments where he's playing it for complete comedic value. When he's sitting on the toilet, when he's been locked in detention, just popping his head around to talk to Stanley Tucci. Just some really, really nice moments that you know when a really good actor's playing comedy and probably enjoying being back on that. It's really good.
I think Spielberg is really good at kind of forcing Tom Hanks to play it more subtle, because I like Forrest Gump or Philadelphia, but they feel a little more like kind of, more dramatic in Cap performances, versus like when you look at the work he does with Spielberg, whether it's Saving Private Ryan or this, or even Catch Me If You Can, he's often making these characters more reserved. And I think like it makes these emotional moments of Tom Hanks in the movie that much more effective. Like that scene we've talked about, when he's seeing the TVs and reacting in horror, or just the way he plays that scene where there's the passenger who's been basically held up by guards for having medication, and the way that Tom Hanks' character plays through that scene, communicating with the guy as an interpreter, as well as kind of helping the guy get away with the medication he needs. It's a lot of very subtle acting, and a lot of acting that I think could have come across with a bad performance or with a different actor or the wrong actor, as we are laughing at him. And that's something that never happens. We are consistently sympathetic to him. In a lot of ways, it feels in a way like it's a performance that belongs next to something like Castaway, where the entire movie centers on him. There's a lot of, an ensemble cast here, not just a volleyball, but nonetheless, he's the one that has to be at the core of every single moment of this movie, and you need to follow him beginning to end. And so many of the, realizations this character has, of the emotional journeys, are played very internally, just on his face. And so like, I think for that reason it works. It's interesting that, the final line is, "I'm going home." And it just made me think of like E.T. almost, about like, that's of course how they close off that film. And there's something about this character where you have a similar like way of projecting your own emotions onto that Tom Hanks character, and he carries you through the movie in a very similar way.
I'm glad you brought up E.T. because there was a deleted scene in this film where he's at the phone bit, and apparently he's saying home phone when he's trying to explain it. And Spielberg had that scene cut, which...
Imagine if Stanley Tucci left like a trail of Reese's Pieces. He's like, "I got him."
He would definitely do that. Stick with the box held up. Yep, absolutely.
Oh, it's just it's a great. There's a real. It's like a fish out of water, isn't it? Like E.T. There's actually some really good E.T. comparisons, almost a family drama with the other people involved, and that's what I found quite charming about the film, is that everyone there serves their purpose. And actually moving on from E.T., let's talk Stanley Tucci, because I'm going to be my introduction. He's always wonderful. My introduction to him was The Hunger Games back in 2012, so I didn't really know who he was. Over the years, I've obviously seen older films, like, oh wow, like that's Stanley Tucci. I wouldn't have known that when I was younger. In this film, this is like the most, and I said that, I can't remember if I said to Dave or to both of you, sorry, before we run, but this is the most un-Stanley Tucci film of all, because normally he's such a great guy. He's so lovable. He's so likable, and he's always had this. He has like his gift is his just natural charm, isn't it? You see, on any interview, he has a real aura, and he knows it when he enters a room. He's absolutely fascinating, and he's almost like the he's like a sort of quieter Jeff Goldblum, if that's even a term. I don't know if that's going to make any sense to anyone, but in this film, I thought, oh my god, like Stanley Tucci is going to just look after this guy for a couple of days. Like he's going to be this like great guy helping him on their journey together. Stanley Tucci in this film is a dick, and I don't say that about villains, but like he's made it his soul. We know he's ambitious because we get the intro. Oh, you've wanted this job for years, blah blah blah. But I did not expect him to sort of turn into this. I say horrific villain. Obviously, he's just doing his job by the letter of the law in reality. But his fascination with Tom Hanks, it's a very interesting character, I would say. It's very two-dimensional. But I feel that Stanley Tucci does enough to make him a constant threat throughout the film. And again, it leads up to some of the more emotional but potentially bizarre moments. And to me, just a wonderful ending with the I forgot the character's name, the policeman that lets him go. Because like the demographic I've sort of been talking about, who this film I think is aimed for, that's right up his street to have a villain of that regard where he's just a dick because he's going to be a dick. There's nothing more to it. We don't need to learn about his family. We don't need to learn about his private life. We just need to know why he's the way he is. And I absolutely loved him. And I want to say it's a different Stanley Tucci role. I've not seen massive amounts of his work, just probably the ones everyone else has seen. So I'm still very limited in my Stanley Tucci knowledge. But how do we feel with him in this? Because I think he's great. I think he suits the film. That's probably a better term.
In terms of casting, I think it's a great. I just put Stanley Tucci in everything because he's amazing. Devil Wears Prada is just top shelf. God, I love Devil Wears Prada. Anyway, so yeah, this film, it's great that he starts to take this so personally. Yes, we don't get a massive amount from him, apart from he wants to be the new big head honcho, and it's about to be handed to him on a silver plate to say it's going to be you. Just don't. They even say it at one point. Just don't. It's like don't mess up. Just don't make. There's a panel coming to see you. Don't mess up this one day when they're here. And then to have this character who he takes so personally that he cannot get him out of his airport, that he becomes a little bit like a bigger villain than he needs to be, because his annoyance is that he can't remove him, and he just wants everything to run smoothly. And this is just it's a spanner in the works that gets bigger and bigger with little changes, like the trolleys. Once Victor discovers that he can get the quarters out, and just he starts making his way. He starts earning more money than him by working for cash for the contractors actually building. And it's just all these little things that play on him. To even like to say the medicine for goat, which is probably one of my favorite scenes, where he's so adamant that he changes that. It tells him what it is, and he knows it's because he's read the forms, but he wouldn't let on to that. And it's just, I adore Stanley Tucci so much that this role, yes, he's awful in it, but in such a good way, in such a pantomime villain kind of way. I love it.
He's still much more likable here than he was in The Lovely Bones, so I'll give him points for that. But his performance here is really interesting in that, like, his character is so clean cut and fastidious. Like, you can tell this is a guy who knows everything. The way he sizes up, those tourists off the top, the scene, George, you mentioned off the, early in the review. This guy knows everything that's going on under his nose, except he doesn't understand Victor. That's the one thing he can't figure out, is that, they give him like a 5-minute window to walk out the door. Victor doesn't take it. He doesn't understand why. And I think that's the thing that drives him slowly crazy over the course of the movie, is that he can never predict Victor, and he doesn't understand why things won't just go his way and have this guy, walk out the door. And he just doesn't understand like this honor code that Victor's following. The one thing that doesn't work for me with the Tucci performance, I like when it gets dark. I think that works for the character, that it would slowly unravel him. I mean, look at this man's office. It's like motivational posters and fish. This guy is weird. But like, that moment at the end where finally Victor goes out the door to go to the jazz club, and Stanley Tucci's like, "Well, that old rascal, what are you gonna do?" And I'm like, "This is a guy that was being driven out of his mind. He would have been on the phone to get that guy arrested in a heartbeat. That's a little too fairy tale-ish for me."
No, I'm with you. I didn't think he'd let him go, and that was it. It was like the better luck next time. It's that sort of like, well, you've just had him here for like 9 months. Like you could have helped, and you know you could have helped, but you haven't. And it's you know what really got me, and it's really sad. But it was the trolley scene. Like I was loving the fact that Tom Hanks was having so much fun pushing those trolleys around. Like, did it make anyone want to get a Burger King? It did for me. Obviously, it didn't. I was at home. But what a great advert for them, by the way. And what I was reading is when they built this airport, they didn't just build this set and have the usual, here's a fake front and like it's just a set design. Some of them were real food outlets where they had actual, food prep equipment in them. It kind of makes me think. I couldn't really find it, but you were like the caterer on production. You'd be like, right, this Burger King is going to actually be the kitchenette for filming. Like, well, we'll make this. This could have been one of the most genius sets ever made in history because it was literally a real terminal. And I love the things like that. Apparently, is it Foyle's bookstore that's in it, or not Foyle's? Is it another book company?
Yeah.
Apparently, Spielberg had the final say on every single company, and when companies were finding out Spielberg's doing a film set at Terminal and there's going to be ways for us to get our company names in. Apparently, they all started applying to get involved, and Spielberg again got to say yes, no, and told some of them that you're in it, but your shot might not ever get seen. And I think it's such a great thing because when you're at an airport, there's just so much nonsense. And over here, the one we laugh at, if there's a British version, Dave, you'll laugh. It would just be W.H. Smith. And Cam, I think you're coming in next year, aren't you? So you're it's like the weirdest chain in the world that they're always empty if you see any left on the high street. There's always talk of them going bust. Because any airport in the UK, they've got about 4 or 5 stores, and we don't know why.
Right.
And it's ridiculous, and I just loved that whole again having real brands in there just added character to the terminal itself. And I'd imagine there are a lot of people that probably would be surprised to find out that it wasn't a real terminal because the attention to detail in building that, I think it was based upon the German airports, I thought was just phenomenal. I know I've sort of diverted from Stanley Tucci at this point, but again, yeah. I mean, imagine being actor just filming there. Like, it'd be weird, wouldn't it? In a good way. Like, I wouldn't know.
I would say that, like, as someone who's been in many airports and actually had Burger King in many airports, I've never seen a staff as jovial as the the staff of this Burger King. Where like I bow down to anyone who like works in those establishments because I work customer service myself. And nothing on the level of what you have to deal with working in airports. So again, all respect in the world to anyone who does. But this movie was not the best representative of that, where it's like all these like saintly people just beaming at you and there's like no lines or anything. Crazy.
And also the airport gets quiet at night. I was like, that's not really how terminals work at international airports. So I don't need to get into the logistics of the aviation industry. I'm sure some people in the comments, if you've ever worked in aviation, maybe comment it below and tell us your experience watching the terminal, because I couldn't ever imagine a film being made about like the industry I work in. It'd be so boring, but a terminal must have given a lot of good people a kick. But we've spoken about Stanley Tucci. We've mentioned some of the supporting cast. Just before we move on to the score, has anyone got any of the characters they'd love to bring up? Have a quick chat about? I know we've sort of mentioned Gupta, Diego Luna, Zeta, and a few others. I don't feel there's anyone on the top of my head, and I feel bad if I missed anyone.
I feel bad I don't have more to say about like Chai McBride, who is like 4th build, but like you don't really get anything out of that character other than like he runs a poker game with the other 2.
Yeah,
Diego Luna and then the custodian, Barry Shabaka Henley, but you don't get anything out of him. I would have liked something. I wouldn't be surprised if something was cut.
Children's movie is in that same scene about Shane's panties. And it goes, we share panties in a mile away. Yes. Just my favorite line of the whole jokes is that shares panties being better games just I love it. Maybe laugh a lot.
What I do know, Bernie Mac was originally meant to be in this film. And Cam, you mentioned about the billing there. If I was, well, I'm not gambling because it's history, but I've got this feeling that could have been like a Bernie Mac role. almost comedy relief, poker table, head of it, fourth billing on Eternal film. I've not seen that many Bernie Mac films. I really want to sketch show because I've seen some really funny clips from the years. And I will go on this hill till whenever I need to. I love two of Michael Bay's, well, not his first two Transformers. I love the first and the third one. And Bernie Mac in Transformers 1, I just always loved. I don't know why. And obviously I didn't know till years after he passed away at such a young age as well. But I feel, yeah, they needed like not another character, but it's just, you don't really get any development of him, do you? The character that comes in that place, that you get to spend so much time with the others. And there's a couple, I think as well, there's I can't remember the actress's name. When he announces he's leaving, is she like a shoe shop? When I can't remember the
she grabs the gloves for him, I think. Socks. She grabs socks.
Yeah,
all the shops
runs
give him
him
stuff as he leaves. Like, you have this, have that.
Yeah, all the stuff are getting sacked. If you actually think about it, although Stanley Tucci's like ran this like a tight ship, it's got to be one of the worst like maintained airports, right? Your staff are having poker games. They're stealing food and giving it to other. Also, my logic as well. Sorry if it sounds dumb, but and again, I know it's a film thing. When they give them like meal vouchers and they can end up in the bin, I don't care about that. You have somebody here that is from not a country. You wouldn't just give him 5 vouchers to last him an entire like civil war. You'd obviously be like giving him like weekly or daily like facilities, I'd imagine. Again, maybe I need to read this book or find out some more about the real life stuff, but that's something for me that, okay, yeah, it's such a ridiculous, childish nitpick, but I think about things like that because the practicality of living at an airport is really fascinating for me. I know that sounds silly, but does anyone else sort of understand that?
You're right. Like, yeah, 5 vouchers was not going to get him through that time, but it obviously just starts to then it's the more the introduction of the Gupta character that you then get given by that. So it's just obviously just a plot point. But yeah, it's I know what you mean.
I do feel like there would be like an airport liaison or something that would be going to deal with him on a regular basis, as opposed to just letting this guy wander blindly with like no money, starving day by day by day.
It's like when we get the great moment of him walking around when he's like trying to have a shave, brush his teeth, and he's walking around in the. Where did he get them from? Again, that's not. I'm just saying that aloud. That's what I was going to say. But there's moments of comedy in this, which I think Spielberg handles well. Very subtle moments. I think it just brings a bit of life to it. And again, if they were doing the real life story, that'd probably be a lot tougher to maybe go into. Certainly again with the background of why he's there in the first place compared to this one. But one thing I want to speak about before we get started, so I actually want to bring up, how do we feel with Victor's actual why he's there? Why is he doing it? The backstory with the jazz musicians for his father. I am very torn on this because I really enjoyed it, but I think it was so quickly revealed in a scene with Catherine Zeta-Jones that I feel that we lost potentially a more dramatic moment because it's got such a satisfying, lovely ending for him. But I feel that the revelation didn't wow me. There wasn't, not that I need to see a tease of, let's have him listening. I mean, okay, we do get him listening to jazz music, don't we, as well, when he's doing the painting and the building stuff. But it never feels like a moment where we can get a deeper understanding of the tin. It's sort of like Stanley Tucci woke up one and said, why has he got that tin? And that's the next 10 minutes of the film. Why has he got the tin? I feel that if they could have subtly done that a little bit more, I don't know, that's just me.
No, it's a massive plot point that should be seeded throughout the movie, that you should know a little bit about it. You should maybe see some of the posters about his dad a bit more throughout the story, so you get that build. I mean, I do like it as a plot point for the ending of the movie, for him getting to the jazz club. But yeah, there's no build to it. It's kind of what's in the peanut can. Oh, this is what's in the peanut can. That's where I'm going, and it's done. It needed a lot more building around it.
Yeah, like to me, it's not a big enough reveal to drag out for like an hour and a half. I would have probably revealed it a lot sooner and talked about like, his relationship with his father and things like that, have it more character related. It kind of reminded me a little bit when I was in creative writing class in grade 12. I wrote a short story and I remember the teacher was like, you need an element of mystery. So I had it was about a guy holding a blackjack dealer at gunpoint. And so I wrote in a section where he put a box on the table and characters kept asking throughout the story, what's in the box? What's in the box? And like, it was so...
his head?
What it was the bullets to the gun. but like, so the gun was never
Nice.
loaded. But like, the point is, it was totally hacky. And like, when I was watching the movie last night, I had flashbacks to this story I'd completely forgotten writing, because I'm like, the way they're doing this just feels a little too on the nose and hacky. Whereas I think there would be a way to make it more character driven versus a lot of other characters going, "What's in the tin? What's in the tin?"
Yeah.
And just getting the autograph at the end, like, sit down, we have a show. We don't get the moment, and it would have been lovely. I mean, I know it wouldn't have meant anything to the jazz musician himself because he was just been handing out an autograph, but I feel that we could have had maybe a scene of them there or something a bit more to understand.
Actually, I think it could have been a powerful scene because obviously a lot of those names on that poster with him may not have been around anymore. So I think it would have been a moment for him to kind of go through and see his friends who were no longer there who'd signed that. Just as a momentary thing, I think would have been a really nice bit of that for him to then sign and see what he was signing for. I think could have been a really, really good moment.
And maybe also just the fact that, like, for Victor, time is standing still and these legends are dying. Like, you could acknowledge, the mortality existing within that, his jazz history, along with where Victor's stuck right now. Like, I think there's ways to just kind of dig a little deeper there.
Yeah, and the things we all know Spielberg's capable of doing so, and which is the other big thing. And I actually want to bring this up. Obviously, if you're listening to this rather than looking, have a look at the screen. Have a look at that Steven Spielberg logo. So this completely blew my mind today. The credits to this film is every single actor, director, everyone giving their autograph. Now, I've been very lucky and met Spielberg, so I've got one behind me on the wall. And when this series was announced, I was trying to come up with a logo. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to put his autograph on there because he's got a very recognizable one. And it was on the homepage of Amblin, which is some more behind-the-scenes gossip if anyone wants it. That made it a lot easier to get a high-res copy. I did not know about the terminal. So I hadn't realized there'd been access to a 1080p version of that signature for a very, very long time. And the worst thing for me, this isn't a criticism, this is just me now moaning about behind the scenes. When we did a trailer for this series, I animated that image you're seeing, that autograph. I animated it so like it had been drawn. So when I'm watching those credits and I see an animation, I just sat there like, I could have just downloaded a video. It would have took me 10 seconds. I spent like, wow, it was okay. It was only about 5-10 minutes of being really honest. But I had to like draw it like he would sign. I was like, how would you sign it? And that was something. But also, again, because I enjoy collecting autographs, whether it's conventions or red carpets, it was really cool to like see that stuff. I know that they did it in Endgame as well, didn't they? Like the end of the era thing with the actors. And
I've got one for you. You know who else did it?
Star Trek.
That's right. Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, ends with the signatures of all the main players.
Yeah.
When you say Star Trek 6,
where Endgame got it from, yeah.
Well, is that still like the original core cast?
It was the final film with the entire original cast.
Okay, so this is probably another Star Trek reference for today. There we go.
Seems to be.
Maybe,
definitely where the Russos got it from. They said they got it from Star Trek.
I never realized that. See, I didn't like that much in the Avengers one, purely because I was like, well, I'm never going to meet these 6. But I'll hold on to my thoughts. But it's a really great thing. And anyone curious that this Spielberg logo, we've now made it a thing. So like every director retrospective, I'm like scanning the internet for high-res copies of an autograph on blank paper to switch up the colors. To make it look like it's presentable, and I've now done it for Spielberg, Nolan, Peter Jackson, and there's going to be a director next year, which I think is going to be a little bit easier because he's done more modern films, hinting what's to come. Akin to Marvel, I haven't planned 10 years worth of videos, but I do have the next 2 series for next year locked in already because that's how far ahead we are. It's not. You have a think; it's quite obvious, which director it's going to be and which series it's going to be for 2023's big films that isn't Christopher Nolan because we've already done it. So I'm waffling at this point. Let's talk about John Williams because that's an autograph that pops up that I still do not own and wish one day to own. How do we feel with this score? Because I'm going to be quite blunt, and I've said this a lot over the series, and I feel like I like to take a back seat of the John Williams stuff at the moment, just because I'm on every week and I love him as a composer. I didn't really notice the score. So that's my observation. 2004, he'd done Prisoner of Azkaban, which he was nominated for an Oscar for. I don't know what was next in 2005, maybe War of the Worlds, or he did something else probably. But how are we feeling with the John Williams soundtrack for this?
I think you're absolutely spot on. It's not a standout Williams theme. When you're watching these Spielberg movies and you come off Catch Me If You Can to then go to the terminal, it's like night and day in terms of John Williams' work. And it is probably, there's probably subtle scores in there but it's not something that I pulled up at all. And to the point when the credits rolled at the end, I was like, was it John Williams? And I had to actually watch to see if it was definitely him who did the score for it, because it didn't come across to me as a John Williams score as I was watching the movie.
Yeah, it seems to alternate between this Caucasian national anthem that he plays kind of throughout the movie with tinkling piano score. And it's just not as inventive as most of his other stuff. It's also not a score I would probably listen to on its own, whereas I would with a lot of his other work. So, yeah.
No, very well. And as I said, we love John Williams here. This might be the shortest Williams segment yet, but he'll be back next week for War of the Worlds. And just moving on from John Williams as we do, we'll talk about the film. So when it was released at a budget of 50 million budget, grossed 219 million. Pretty good numbers for 2004 original concept. I think we're in a time in that era where we're starting to get more sequels. We're getting your big MVPs. You're getting your Harry Potter, your Lord of the Rings, your Star Wars. That early noughties moving into the modern day universe filmmaking to me is where it's slowly kicking in. And I think that's solid numbers for a film like this, a Spielberg film. And Oscars wise, as we always speak about, not a single nomination, which is also completely understandable. And we were trying to backtrack. The last time we think he had a film with no Oscar nominations, we believe, is always 1989. I mean, you know what? I'll say this.
Did AI get any? Did AI probably got some like effects?
It got one. It got I think, was it best soundtrack? It had something. It definitely had two, I think, when we did that recently. But what I would actually say with this, and again, I don't know what other films came out the same year, so I need to sort of refresh it. But you've built a terminal, a functioning terminal, I'm going to say. Is that enough to get a best production design? Because I know, listen, Oscars are retrospective, whatever, but to me, one of the biggest feats of this film is the set. And I think it's very interesting that there was no recognition for that.
I agree. Like, I think this movie deserved like a nomination for that. Like, the production design on this is unbelievable. And I think a lot of people would be fooled into thinking that this was shot in an actual terminal.
Yeah. I was certainly one of those first time I saw it where it was, you think, oh, it must be in an airport, somewhere they've shut down. For that to not get looked at all, to say that they built this whole thing as a functioning, with some actual functioning outlets and stores and a full working placement to go through with a new fountain at the end that doesn't work, that Tom Hanks built, which wasn't in the plans or anything, just built it. But yeah, so yeah, it's crazy that there was no design Oscar for this movie at all.
I've got the list of nominations for that year. So the 5 that were nominated, this was 2004, right? 2004?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have The Aviator, which won. And then the nominees were Finding Neverland, Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Phantom of the Opera, and A Very Long Engagement.
Wow.
Oh, I mean, I've not seen all of them, but Unfortunate Events getting in. I mean, I quite like that film. I've got a very hearty attachment to that book series, not the Netflix series, the book series and the first film. I can understand that one, but it is interesting, isn't it? And again, you know, there's always that fascinating conversation of Oscars. I mean, it's never going to happen. Should they be done 20 years later? I love the logic of reevaluating films or looking at years, but the whole, to me, purpose is that they are a contextual events. That's always going to be the way.
Sometimes it's also just a case of the movie wasn't reviewed particularly well. It didn't make especially in domestic box office, it did like, I think 77 million or something like that, which was underperforming for Spielberg and Hanks. I think, you know, you can say, oh, the Academy wants to celebrate the best. They also like popularity. So, or movies that are released very close to Oscar time. And this one, I think was like, it was closer to like June. Like, that's crazy. They should have released it in like November.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
This is quite a week. June the 18th, 2 films on the same day, Dodgeball and The Terminal. Oh my. White Chicks a few days after. The Notebook a week after, a romance film.
Notebook, yeah,
Spider-Man
would have,
2
yeah.
at the end of June, and even before it, Napoleon Dynamite, The Chronicles of Riddick. Harry Potter was the same month. But that's got to be American release date, surely. Listen, I'm not going to do this for every film, but I think it's very fascinating. I did not think this would be a June release. I thought this would have been like a October, November, and maybe had it been later in the year, they would have pushed it towards those Oscars. But June, I'll say this: it did well to hit 200 mil coming out in that June. Being
It's
a
not a
romance
summer
film,
movie.
yeah, it's. I know the logic of people going to the airport in June as well, but maybe drop it in September when they've all come home from holiday. When then
They must have been looking at it as counter programming of like, well, here's a movie for the adults in the summer. They can go see a Spielberg Tom Hanks movie, but it is weird because if you're DreamWorks and you're making this movie, you don't know how it's going to be reviewed. You don't know if it could get Oscar nominations, but you would probably at least guess that it could, given the pedigree behind it. So you'd think you would push for more of like October, November, December release date.
Yeah, I'm making that 100. We've not done that before. Maybe we'll do a few more. We'll look at release date windows because it's really cool actually seeing some of the historic ones. Come out the same as Dodgeball. That's insane. I don't know how on earth that happened, but talking with that, I'm talking about how it's perceived today. I sort of joked at the start. A lot of people requested to be on this. I'm kind of going to pose this more to you two both. How has this film been over the years in which you've seen it? How looking at it today? Dave, you mentioned sort of like ambient background stuff.
Yeah,
I guess that works for it though. Like to me, like I wouldn't hesitate at watching this again in the future. I'd actually probably share this to a few people if I could, because I think I would go on a limb and say this is a film the general audience would probably enjoy a lot more, maybe more than a Spielberg or a Tom Hanks fan. But I can certainly see why this is popular amongst people.
As I say, it's been a film since I caught it the first time that I've seen probably 5 or 6 times now. Maybe not all the way through all the time, but caught bits of it, and then it's on. I'll watch the rest of it. I really enjoy it as just a really easy watch. It's not a difficult thing, and I enjoy the humor in it. I enjoy the moving moments in it. I just think it's a really, really easy Spielberg movie to sit down and enjoy. And you're right. I won't. This is not something I'll not see again. I'll watch this a few more times without doubt.
I think it has a stronger reputation than say like Always, has, where when we talked about Always, like that's probably the most forgotten Spielberg. I don't really even count Sugarland because not a lot of people even know about it, period. Whereas like Always came out during that, really popular Spielberg period. This one, I think, has become sort of a minor Spielberg for the era. One that people acknowledge. I think they do watch it, but it hasn't gotten sort of the noisy reappraisal that stuff like Catch Me If You Can or War of the Worlds have. I don't know if that'll happen, but it does seem like one just because of the fact you have Tom Hanks, then like the biggest movie star in the world with Spielberg. It's always going to be remembered because it's in that grouping of movies they made together. But I think it is viewed on the low end of those films.
No, I can 100% say, especially as we said, this is some of the Meadow Bridge of Spies post. It's almost like a renaissance, them coming back together sort of 10 plus years later. Saving Private Ryan. And, almost wasn't. I'm so glad he wasn't Peter Pan and Hook. I think that would have been terrible to have seen. Robin Williams was to me the right person for a film of that sort of, especially now, looking at it now, 100%. Go check out a Hook review if you want to hear us talk about Robin Williams. But before we get to the final thoughts, really quickly, because there's been some enjoyable stuff. If everyone can, do you know your favorite scene from the film? I don't want to put you on the spot if not, but if there's anything, I feel like we've spoken about some of the good ones, but overall, I don't ever seen that sticks out to me. I just found it very pleasant throughout.
The Medicine for Goat is my favorite scene in the movie, without a shadow of a doubt, without anything else in there. That scene of that man desperate to get those drugs out onto that plane, and Hanks's realization of, oh, hold on, I know how he can get this, and trying to explain it. Like, you don't know what he's saying, but he's shitting the drugs just to get his point across that I need you to say this and you can take it. It's just, I think it's such a well-had moment, and it's the moment of the breaking point for Tucci as well, when he just grabs Hanks after he's done it to lose the position he's always wanted. But that's my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the medicine scene is like the real powerhouse scene, I think, of the movie. I also really do enjoy the first half hour or so where it's him kind of discovering this world at the airport. You're seeing him go through the bureaucracy. And there's some amazing filmmaking where like Spielberg is just like, zooming that camera through the airport, or a moment. Maybe my favorite shot in the movie is when they're basically bringing him into the lounge, where he's going to be spending the rest of the movie, and the camera's just like spinning around him, kind of showcasing the disorientation he's experiencing. So like all those technical touches and the way they build that world is, to me, where the movie really comes to life.
No, they really well said. One thing we haven't spoken about Stanley Tucci, the apple on the bag of crisps at the start. Tom Hanks, when he doesn't know English, Tom Hanks's reaction, his physical performance in those scenes, I absolutely loved. And he just looks like, what? Like when the crisps are everywhere, like he doesn't understand it. And it's these subtle moments that I think Tom Hanks really delivers with this, and it's just great to see him in a completely different role. I guess you could argue it's almost a Castaway type thing, but I feel that's something we've not seen from Hanks certainly at this point. And heading to my final thoughts, as I said, I really enjoyed this. It's not top 10 or anything for me, but it's a very pleasant film. I think it's got I'm glad you both brought up the goat scene. Actually, that's probably one of the more emotional moments. Again, Tom Hanks discovering what's happened at his fictional home, not planet. I'm so used to saying fictional planets these days because it's like Star Wars. Fictional country. I think it's a very good Tom Hanks performance in this film, and it is worth watching for that. And I said, just to see something different. I don't feel there are films like this. If someone wants to point one out, please do. But I feel this film stands out by itself, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It certainly stands out amongst some of Spielberg's other work. But ultimately, it might not work for all. But to me, it's just solid. It's not pushing the boundaries. And I think we're at a point of his career. I think this is episode 22 or 23 now. We're 2/3 of the way through. And if this is regarded as a lower tier Spielberg film, this is probably better than what most directors could do at their peak, if I'm being blunt.
I think I've said it before on some of the movies, it's probably for me a perfect Sunday movie that you can just put on and just that kind of relaxed day, and it's just going to be nothing you have to stress yourself about, nothing you have to really set your brain to actually think about the whole movie, and just kind of put on and let it drift past you for 2 hours. It's not an overly long movie. It blitzes by. The pacing in it is actually really good. It cuts through really quick to get to the end point. He's leaving to go to that jazz club. So yeah, I think it's a really easy watch. It's a really nice little film, and yeah, you're right. It's not top tier Spielberg, but I really enjoy it.
I think for me, I think I like this one maybe a little less than you two, but it sort of speaks to like the best and worst impulses of Steven Spielberg, where like his film craft is on fire here. Like you're seeing so many amazingly conceived shots and moments. Like it's Spielberg, the humanitarian filmmaker, often bringing a lot of humanity to this story. And then at the same point, tipping into that kind of cloying, schmaltzy stuff that he can do in his sleep. And I think he often uses almost like a crutch. Like he's almost scared that the audience isn't going to be won over by the movie and they need this kind of stuff to feel good. And I don't think he did. Like, I don't think he had as much confidence maybe as he should have. And some of the, it's, as we said, it's very episodic. Some of the stuff works, some of it doesn't. So for me, it's a movie of moments. Some of the moments really click, some don't, but that doesn't make it any less interesting to watch.
No, really well said. I'm with you on that. And as I said, we want to hear from you. So everyone at home, please do comment below with your thoughts on the tournament if you haven't already. And as I said, if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, a fan of Tom Hanks, there's a few more Tom Hanks Spielberg films for us to talk about. Please do get involved, hit the subscribe button. A lot more videos on the way. I've mentioned top 10s a lot. I don't know if I've said that on one of these videos already, but if it's not blatantly obvious by now, there's of course going to be a very big Spielberg top 10 video at the end of this series. So as we delve closer to towards the end of his career, towards the more recent films, we're obviously going to have a lot more details on dates, etc., for that. And if you're curious about what does come next, I've said it tonight. Next up is War of the Worlds. Tuesday the 6th of September. We actually have a panel of 4 people, I believe, about Tempting Fate for this. And it's going to be very fun to speak about. That is. You go back to the very first episode of the series when we reviewed Duel, myself and Tom Woods. This was both our first Spielberg film we spoke about. So that was a really random, awkward moment because I said no one's going to have the same 2, and we did on episode 1. So War of the Worlds, Tom Cruise, Spielberg back together. Check out our Minority Report video. That was phenomenal to do. But whilst I stop plugging that, I'm going to quickly plug you guys. So, Dave, I have your Twitter here at the Dave Bryan. I've also got a link in the description to the channel. You've been on a fair few of these now. I don't want to keep saying why should people follow you. I need to find a better way of saying that. But what are you currently watching? I know you did a lot of Bond films earlier. I know you're doing the run of the Oscar films as well.
Yes.
Where are you up to with that?
I'm up to 1946, I think. I'm up to in my Oscar movies. I think I'm 17 movies into the best pictures. So I'm slowly getting there. Some of these early 40s movies were a bit of a slog to get through. Like I came to Gone with the Wind for the first time, a classic. No, it's not. So yeah, I've got the Lost Weekend. So yeah, my Twitter, if you follow the Dave Bryan, that is what you'll see. Just generally the movies I'm watching. You'll tend to find me just here hanging about like a bad smell. Normally I'll just pop up now and again.
Absolutely, and we'll have you on some more of these, and Cam as well at Spy Hards. We've had you on for not just Spielberg, we've had you on for Bond in the past, and I had the very good chance of joining you for the Grey Man earlier this year. Where can the people find you that don't already? I've literally put it on Twitter there, so it's a stupid question.
Yes, Spy Hards on all social media stuff. And you can find us just in anywhere you get your podcasts. Just search Spy Hards. And yeah, we do weekly reviews of spy movies. We jump all over the place from the 20s right up until, as you know, George said, Gray Man, very recent. We also do interviews with filmmakers and actors and what have you who work on spy films. A couple of the recent ones, we've talked to Rick Friedberg, who wrote and directed Spy Hard, the Leslie Nielsen film. And we also talked to Miriam Dabo, who played Kara in The Living Daylights.
Definitely, everybody, please check out the channel. It's always great when we get to go through it. And I believe we're just on your 2-year anniversary or 100th episode. We must be, because around about this time last year, we had you on for Goldeneye, and that was the anniversary of the channel with an incredible entrance by Scott. So go check out our Bond stuff. We had Spy Hards on for a couple of those as well. And I said, you know, there's a Spielberg film with spy in the title coming out towards later. And Cam, we're going to have you on again. We're going to have you on for the top 10, but we're going to get you and Scott on together for Bridge of Spies. I know you've done it on your channel, so people can check out a precursor to that, but that's going to be exciting. So everybody, please do follow these. And as we always do, Spielberg, he's a man that's directed 34 films, whether you want to include Twilight Zone, 33. If not, that's my sort of internal question these days. This is what's coming up next. War of the Worlds, Munich, Indiana Jones, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh.
Spoiler.
Yeah. And The Adventures of Tintin has made the board. You know what? A film I have still yet to watch that I am so excited for, because I am a massive advocate of motion capture. It's my favorite technology in modern filmmaking, and seeing how it's been developed. And I cannot wait to see that. Was it Andy Serkis, Spielberg? Peter Jackson's involved. Is Edgar Wright involved, I feel, or Joe Cornish or something?
Yeah, man, Simon Pegg.
There's a lot of people
And Nick
involved.
Frost.
Nick Frost. Yeah, and Billy Elliot. I always forget his name. I'm so sorry. I know he's doing really well now.
Jamie Bell.
Jamie Bell, that's it. So that's going to be fun when we get the chance to get to that. But that's in the 2010s, and that's what started to freak me out. Like, it's only a few weeks ago, in like the it felt like the 80s. Now it's like we're in the mid noughties and we're just flying. So there's a lot more Spielberg stuff on the way. And I said, please do hit the subscribe button if you're a fan of that. If you enjoyed this video, you might be wondering what else is happening on the channel. Well, we're pre-recording these very far in advance. So any new reviews that for series or for films that might be up, do check the channel for those. And I always say follow us on our own social medias. It's the best place to find out about videos. Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. A link to Redbubble where you can help support the channel, pick up merch. Dave is rocking the Nolan logo tonight. That was a surprise to be sure, but a very welcome one. And I feel like we mentioned earlier the retrospective, so you can check out all of our Nolan reviews as well, back from in the build-up to Tenet, and we'll be talking about him a lot next year again. Any chance to talk Nolan, I will be there. But that isn't today. Today is Steven Spielberg. Today is The Terminal. So once again, thank you all for watching, and be sure to join us on the next one. Take care.